Hi there, Sylvain from Bernina, calling all my fellow quilters. You know that when you piece a quilt top, precision is paramount. And to Bernina, precision is everything. In the machines, the accessories, everything. So over the years, our engineers have developed a half a dozen patchwork feet. And they show a design evolution. And this often leapfrogs the design evolution of the machines, where new features like dual feed are introduced. Then the existing presser feet will have to catch up to adapt to either a wider feed dog or dual feed. So I will give you a tour of the key features of the feet, starting with foot number 37. That's the original 1/4-inch foot, very well designed. And as you'll see at the bench, there are people who like to play peekaboo with their fabric. You like to verify on the edge. And so 37 does not prevent that from happening. So we came out with a 57, which has a little guide on the side that will prevent the fabric from exceeding. And for wider machines, we have a 97 foot that has the wider feed dog base on the foot to match the traction of the feed dog. So I will go to the bench and show you the variety of feet and what the particulars are for each one. And also we'll talk about quilting the quilt, whether we want to use dual feed versus walking foot. Now that's the topic of a previous video, but I'll touch on this today. So let's go to the bench and let's look at the feet one at a time. Let's start with a little bit of background. Quilters will tell you that you don't do your best piecing with a zigzag plate and a regular zigzag foot, regardless of the size, because there is less fabric control around the needle penetration area. Now you can use a 1/4-inch mark and follow through, but there isn't the precision controlling the fabric here at the stitch point. So let's see a better option. Experienced quilters prefer a straight stitch plate when they piece. That way, when the fabric is being perforated by the needle, it's controlled right around the needle, so there's no distortion there. And you can use the 1/4-inch mark on the stitch plate. And a little tip in passing, if you want a scant 1/4-inch seam, a tip I learned from a colleague is that you withdraw the fabric just a hair. Once you see the full marking right at the edge of the fabric, you have a scant 1/4-inch seam. Personally, I tend to follow right on the seam marking itself. Now that's all and good, but if you have a regular presser foot, there's more drag on the fabric, and while things are moving, you rely only on that little marking in front of the foot, in front of the feed dog, to guide your fabric. Now what if the foot itself helps you guide the fabric to maintain the 1/4-inch seam allowance? And that is where Bernina developed the first patchwork foot, number 37. As you can see, patchwork foot number 37 is narrow. It is providing a 1/4-inch seam allowance on both sides from the needle position in the center. It has grooves on the sides, or notches on the side here, at the needle position and a 1/4-inch behind and in front. So if you need to do any kind of pivoting, you'll be able to do so easily. So not only is there the 1/4-inch seam allowance on the right hand side of the foot, you have 1/8 of an inch seam allowance on the inside of the toe, on either side. Typically we use the right toe for guiding, but this way you have both. So this is a straight stitch foot, which provides good stitch control and good thread and fabric control. It gives you both seam allowances that are used for regular and miniatures. And if you look at the underside of the foot, I always look at the underside of the foot. You see that there's a nice thread escape here that allows the thread to lie flat and move out the back with the fabric undisturbed, so that you get even tension and even stitching throughout your patchwork. Now, foot 37 gives you an exact 1/4-inch seam allowance if the fabric is lined up with the edge of the foot. But many of us quilters are visual, and we like to visually verify that we are at the edge. It's a natural tendency. It's a safety check that your brain does, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's good in everyday life. But by the time I can see, and here I have just a hint of the blue fabric poking. If I look from above the foot, I may not even notice. But that means that my seam allowance is now just a hair over. Instead of being scant 1/4 inch, it's now a little in excess of a 1/4 inch. And then my blocks may not come out even or to the measure. So when we started getting reports of this happening, there's nothing wrong with the foot, there's nothing wrong with the fabric, but if we do this visually, we defeat the purpose of the foot without realizing it. So when reports came of that happening, Bernina said, what if we add a guard on the edge of the foot that would allow to prevent that? So enters foot 57. It is the exact same sole as foot 37. So think of it as a 37 plus 20, the 20 being the guard on the right-hand side. It is exactly the same sole, same thread escape, but this guide on the side, which flexes, by the way, will enforce, it's like a guardrail. It will enforce the 1/4 inch seam allowance. I have found this also very useful when I needed to do a 1/4 inch allowance on a thick or heavy project, because then I could butt it against the guard and not worry about it going left and right. I could just keep it against the guard. Now, the guard is flexible because if you come across cross seams and you don't want this to jab into them, as you approach, you can actually manually lift it with your finger to ease over any obstacle and then keep going. So 57 is your 1/4 inch with guard. And that allows you to get accurate 1/4 inch, sometimes despite myself. So that's worked very well. By now, you realize that these feet are narrow. They offer 1/4 inch seam allowances. What if you have a machine with a wide feed dog? So we wanted to optimize the foot for use on the wider machines, realizing that these narrow feet don't take full advantage of a wide feed dog. So Bernina came out with foot number 97. 97 is the same principle, and it looks like a blown up version, if you want, a larger version of the others. Now, let me show you the difference. You still have the grooves on the sides for your 1/4 inch at the needle before and after. If you look at the right-hand side, it is identical. And let me put 37 next to 97. You'll see that this toe here and that toe are identical. So on the far right here, you will have your 1/4 inch seam allowance. On the inside of the right toe, you have your 1/8 of an inch if you want to do miniatures. Now, on the other side, notice that the sole is wider. Instead of being right close to the ankle of the foot, it exceeds further to cover the feed dog. That will give you better fabric traction and better piecing. Now, that being done, this is no longer a 1/4 inch on the edge of the foot. So here you have a groove that is 1/8 of an inch. If you look at the groove, it's equidistant to the 1/8 of an inch inside of the other toe. And then the inside of the left toe will be your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So you still have both measurements in there. Now, at the back of the foot, the wider sole continues, and that will cover the entire feed dog, including the back center pad of the feed dog. So you will get good traction on wider feed dog machines, all the 9mm capable machines. And then this here is your 1/4 inch, so it goes all the way to the stitch point. So it maintains a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So for a visual guide, it's excellent. And then you have the widening of the sole gradually here, so as to not jab into the fabric. You can see that the widening of the sole is tapered so that the foot will not interfere with the fabric flow. So it has been optimized for wider machines. Now, sometimes optimization is one thing, but using the foot is another. So we realized that this foot also could benefit from a guide on the right, because some people like to verify that the fabric is at the edge of the foot. So what Bernina did is came up with what looks like the traditional seam guide that we've had for a long time. It looks very similar. The difference here being that there is a notch cut out of the guide, because the feed dog will move up and back and down in this area and not knock against the guide. Because when this guide is against the foot, remember that a 1/4 inch from the needle position is still on top of the feed dog. So that gives clearance to prevent damage, which is a good design, good engineering. Not only that, this notch here will come and notch against the foot on the side here. So now we have the optimum 1, 2, 3 engineering solutions. You have a foot that has all the metrics on it, that has the wide feed dog coverage for traction, and that has the guide available that notches against the foot and will be fastened down so that the fabric cannot escape. So that's equivalent to what foot 57 would do, but with the added traction out the back. So the foot, the straight stitch capability, the guide, and the wider feet dog means you get higher traction. And that is available for all contemporary machines made since 1997. Now that's all and good, but what about dual feed? We've seen in previous videos that dual feed is a great feeding and traction aid when you sew on your fabric. So Bernina reissued these feet as 37D, 57D, and 97D. So same design of the feet, the soles, everything identical, with the addition of the cutout at the back for the dual feed to come into action. So when you have guaranteed seam allowance metrics with the guide added on, especially, and dual feed in the back, you have the best solution for your piecing. The sweet sauce is to combine these feet with your straight stitch plate, because the straight stitch plate will give you that extra fabric control right in the center so that your seam allowance does not waver as you go through. You can piece at even higher speed and not have any distortion on your fabric. So that is how Bernina engineered the patchwork feet for optimum results. Once you have pieced your quilt top, we often get the question, what foot or feet should I use to quilt the quilt? Now, if you're going to quilt at the machine with the feed dogs up as opposed to free motion, then it's either a dual feed foot, a D foot, or with the dual feed engaged, or the walking foot. Dual feed, as we've seen in a previous video, is sufficient for small items. Let's say mug rugs. You can do table runners as long as it's thin batting and relatively lightweight. Dual feed is sufficient for that. For anything heavier, whether it's a wall quilt, a large quilt, anything, even if it's thin batting, but the quilt weighs a few pounds, then the walking foot is really your ally. And the walking foot has the advantage that it will control the fabric before, at, and after the stitching point. And this is right now the sole that I use for stitching the ditch. I do that a lot on my quilts. It's also a sole that with an edge guide in the middle that can be used to line up your binding when you finish sewing it on. So I use the walking foot pretty much for quilting at the machine on my Berninas. Now that's variety in patchwork feet. Now to me, variety is good because I can get the right foot for the particular type of work I do, or depending on what machine I have. Starting with the standard 1/4 inch markings and metrics, to a foot like 57 that has the added guide to prevent fabric peekaboo, and for wider feed dog machines, a widened version of the foot. All three being available standard or with dual feed. So on contemporary machines made since 1997, all 6 feet are available. On machines made before 1997, the vintage machine, feet 37 and 57 are available. Of course, there's no dual feed before 97, so these are the 2 feet available for vintage machines. Now, once the patchwork is done, you need to quilt the quilt. And this is where either dual feed on a regular foot, whether it's number 1 or number 34D, for instance, might work for you, for smaller projects especially. As we've seen in a previous video, if it gets heavier, the walking foot is your ticket. And the Bernina Walking Foot not only is precise, rapid, quiet, it's super well engineered, it offers 3 soles. I have right now the edge guiding sole, which is great for stitching in the ditch or following the edge of a binding. You also have the conventional, what we used to call the plaid matching sole, that has full fabric control. Also has a groove, so you can use it on the surface of a quilt, especially if you're following certain lines. Or one that I like to use is the open toe sole. That lets me see right to the needle, so as I stitch on the quilt, I can see where exactly my stitches are landing. Regardless of what kind of work you do, you'll have the right sole included. Also, the seam guides on the left and the right are included. So if you do grid line quilting, it's piece of cake. You just put the guide, set the distance, and keep sewing. So the walking foot will be your ticket for quilting the quilt. Now, if you want to find out which of the patchwork feet suits you best for the kind of quilting you do and your work style, make an appointment with your local Bernina store, test drive the foot, Typically, you don't need to have 6. One will do. I happen to have several because over the years they came out, so I added to the collection. But if I were to get one today, because I have access to dual feed, it would be 97D. Now, 37D and 57D are available as well. So if you're used to one, you just want to add dual feed, that option's available as well. The key is go test drive one and get the right foot for your patchwork. It'll be more precise, more accurate, more even. I know it worked for me. So I wish you happy quilting, from piecing to the quilting stitch, and make sure you have the right foot. It makes your work more enjoyable and your results just better. And we'll see you next time.